Some of the most celebrated safety innovations in automotive history, features that were supposed to save lives, that manufacturers advertised as breakthroughs that drivers trusted completely, turned out to be statistically more dangerous than having nothing at all. Not slightly worse, not marginally less effective. Actively lethal in ways the engineers never predicted and the public never knew until the bodies started piling up in patterns nobody could ignore anymore. A few of these will genuinely shock you. A couple you will completely understand the moment I explain the physics. And number 7 is something that was standard equipment on millions of vehicles and killed more people in specific crash scenarios than if the car had been built without any safety system in that position whatsoever. You do the math on how that made it to production. If you have ever wondered why certain safety features vanished overnight, or why regulations suddenly demanded complete redesigns of systems everyone thought were working fine, hit subscribe right now, because we are about to go deep on the airbag designs that failed so catastrophically they had to be pulled from the market, and why some of them made headlines for all the wrong reasons. The first-generation Takata side curtain airbags that deployed with excessive force. These were supposed to be the next evolution in passenger protection. Side impact crashes were killing thousands every year and the solution seemed obvious. Airbags that drop from the roofline like a curtain protecting your head and the window. Beautiful concept. Takata built millions of them. Car manufacturers loved the design because it was compact and integrated cleanly. Here is what nobody caught in testing. In certain temperature conditions, the propellant aged differently than predicted. When the bag deployed, it did not cushion. It detonated. That curtain came down with enough force to cause skull fractures and low-speed impacts where the passenger would have walked away with a bruise. The mechanism was brutal. The bag was supposed to inflate and float between you and the window. Instead, it became a hammer swinging down from above at speeds exceeding what the original impact would have generated. By the time the pattern emerged, vehicles in hot climates were showing failure rates that made actuaries start pulling data. NHTSA mandated recalls in the early 2000s and required complete redesigns with slower inflation rates and temperature-stable propellants. The original design was supposed to prevent traumatic brain injuries. It caused them instead. In controlled studies comparing similar crashes, occupants in vehicles without those specific curtain airbags had better outcomes than occupants who took the full deployment to the head. Takata ended up paying out billions. Those airbags do not exist anymore. The ones in your car now use completely different chemistry and deployment curves, and every single one is temperature tested across ranges that would have caught this the first time if anyone had thought to check. Early passenger side airbags mounted too low in the dashboard. This one sounds like a small detail, it was not. When passenger airbags first became mandatory in the mid-90s, engineers were still figuring out optimal placement. The driver's side bag had been refined for years. It came out of the steering wheel hub, direct line to the chest. Predictable, passenger side was trickier. Some manufacturers mounted the airbag module lower in the dashboard, closer to the glove box, thinking it would reduce the visibility obstruction and cost less to integrate. Here's what actually happened. When that bag deployed, it did not meet the passenger where they were sitting. It shot upward at an angle. If you were an adult sitting normally, it caught you under the chin and snapped your head back with enough force to cause cervical fractures. If you were shorter, if you were a teenager, if you were leaning forward to adjust the radio, that bag came up like an uppercut. The federal motor vehicle safety standards were revised to mandate specific mounting heights and deployment angles. Testing dummies had to show head and neck injury criteria within acceptable limits across a range of seating positions. The old low-mount designs failed every single test once the standards tightened. What was lost? Cheaper tooling costs for manufacturers and slightly better forward visibility. What was gained? Necks that stayed attached to spines. In side-by-side crash comparisons, passengers in cars with the low-mount bags had statistically worse injury outcomes than passengers in vehicles with no passenger airbag at all, because at least nothing was actively breaking their neck on the way to hitting the dashboard. Those modules were retrofitted or replaced across entire model years. You will not find a single new car with that mounting position anymore. It is not just bad design, it is legally prohibited. Rear seat airbags that deployed from the front seatbacks without proper child detection. This was supposed to be the future. Rear seat occupants, especially in luxury sedans, deserved the same protection as front passengers. Mercedes and a few other high-end manufacturers started installing airbags in the back of the front seats. They would deploy rearward in a crash, cushioning the person sitting behind. Elegant solution. Catastrophic oversight. Nobody properly accounted for child seats. When a rear-facing infant seat was installed behind the front passenger, and that seatback airbag deployed, it shoved the child seat forward and compressed the infant against the base with enough force to cause asphyxiation and chest trauma. The bag was designed for an adult torso. It met a rigid plastic shell with a baby inside. In multiple documented cases, children in rear-facing seats sustained fatal injuries in crashes they would have survived without the airbag deployment. The mechanism is straightforward physics. That bag has to inflate fast and hard enough to stop an adult moving forward at collision speed. When it hits something rigid 6 inches behind the seatback, all that force concentrates into a tiny space. The European New Car Assessment Program and NHTSA both updated standards to require either automatic detection systems that disable the bag when a child seat is present or complete removal of rear seatback airbags in configurations where child seats are likely. Most manufacturers just stopped installing them. The liability was not worth the marginal benefit for adult passengers. Modern rear seat airbag systems use roof-mounted curtains instead, which do not carry the same risk of compressing a child's seat. The seatback designs are gone, not improved, gone, and if you have an older luxury car with them, your manual has big warnings about child seat placement that were added in revisions after people died. First-generation knee airbags that caused lower leg fractures. Knee airbags were a brilliant idea in theory. In a frontal crash, your knees hit the dashboard or the lower console. If we put an airbag there, we could reduce leg injuries and keep you positioned correctly for the main airbag. Honda and a few others pioneered this in the early 2000s. The problem was timing and force. These bags deployed at the same millisecond as the main airbag. That meant they were inflating while your legs were still moving forward. The bag did not cushion your knee, it blocked it. The result was a sudden stop of the lower leg while the upper body kept moving. Tibial plateau fractures, shattered femurs, knee dislocations that required reconstructive surgery. In crash data analysis, occupants with the early knee airbags showed higher rates of serious lower extremity injuries than occupants in the same crash scenarios without them. The airbag was supposed to prevent exactly those injuries. It made them worse by introducing a hard inflated surface exactly where the leg was accelerating into the dash. New federal standards required knee airbags to deploy slightly later and with lower pressure. They also had to pass specific lower leg injury tests that measured tibia load and femur bending. The current generation knee airbags work. The first ones did not. They were pulled, redesigned, retested. Some manufacturers stopped offering them entirely. You can still find knee airbags in modern cars, but the deployment profile is completely different, softer, slower, later, and crash statistics now show they actually help instead of turning your knee into gravel. The original designs are not just outdated, they are a case study in how good intentions and bad calibration can turn a safety feature into a liability. Airbags that deployed in minor fender benders and caused more injuries than the crash itself. This was a sensitivity problem. Early airbag control modules used relatively simple accelerometers. If deceleration exceeded a certain threshold, the bags deployed, period. The problem was that threshold was set too low on some models. A 5-mile-per-hour parking lot bump could trigger deployment. You would tap someone at a stoplight and suddenly take an airbag to the face at over 100 miles per hour deployment speed. Broken noses, detached retinas, wrist fractures from the airbag shoving your hands off the wheel, burns from the propellant. All of this in a crash where you would have been completely unharmed otherwise. Insurance data started showing a pattern. Minor property damage claims where the airbag deployed were generating massive medical bills. The airbag injury was worse than anything the actual crash would have caused. NHTSA updated the regulations to require dual-stage deployment and smarter sensing. Modern systems use multiple accelerometers, crash severity algorithms, seat position sensors, belt tension data. The system has to know how bad the crash actually is before deciding to punch you in the face with a nylon bag, moving faster than most people can process. Low-speed impacts do not trigger deployment anymore unless other factors indicate real danger. The old single-threshold systems were recalled across multiple manufacturers. What was lost? Simplicity. Early airbags were mechanically straightforward. What was gained? Not getting a broken orbital bone because someone tapped your bumper in a Walmart parking lot. In statistical reviews, vehicles with the overly sensitive system showed higher minor injury rates in low-speed collisions than vehicles without airbags. That is the definition of a failed safety device. Those modules do not exist in new cars. The algorithms are proprietary now and tested across thousands of crash scenarios before approval. And your car is not going to explode a bag into your face because you hit a curb. Side torso airbags that deployed into the armrest and provided zero actual protection. Some early side impact airbags were mounted in the seat, which was smart. Others were mounted in the door panel, which sounds smart until you think about what happens in a side impact. The door crushes inward. If the airbag is in the door, it is getting crushed too. Some manufacturers tried mounting them in the center console armrest, angled outward. Theoretically, it would deploy across your torso from the side. In practice, by the time that bag inflated and reached across the cabin, the door had already made contact with your ribs. The bag ended up deploying into space that was already occupied by your compressed torso and the intruding door. It did not cushion anything. It just added more mass into an already collapsing space. Crash test data showed that occupants with these armrest-mounted side bags had identical injury patterns to occupants with no side airbag at all. Identical. The bag was not even a factor in the outcome. It deployed too slowly and too far away to matter. Federal side impact standards were updated to require bags that deploy between the occupant and the door within milliseconds, before intrusion begins. That meant seat-mounted or door-mounted systems that were fast enough to beat the crush. The armrest designs failed every updated test. Manufacturers pulled them, retooled entire interiors. The side airbags in modern cars come out of the seat because that is the only place they actually work. The armrest bags were not just ineffective, they were selling a false sense of security. You thought you had side impact protection. You did not, and people who might have positioned themselves differently or made different decisions did not know they were unprotected until it was too late. Those designs are gone and they are not coming back. Mounting location matters as much as the bag itself. Airbags without proper venting that cause secondary injuries from overpressure. When an airbag deploys, it does not just inflate, it also has to deflate. If it stays inflated, you bounce off it. If it deflates too fast, it does not cushion anything. The deflation happens through vent holes in the bag fabric. Some early designs did not have enough venting or had vents that clogged with propellant residue. The bag stayed inflated too long. In a crash, you hit the bag, which was good. Then you rebounded off it back into your seat, which was not great. Then you came forward again in the secondary motion and hit the still inflated bag a second time, which added injury on top of injury. Or worse, the bag trapped you against it and you could not move while the rest of the crash was still happening. The overpressure also caused ear injuries. That sealed bag basically created a pressure wave inside the cabin. Ruptured eardrums were common in deployments where the venting failed. New standards required specific deflation rates. Bags have to lose pressure within a defined window. Too fast, they are useless. Too slow, they cause secondary impact injuries. Testing now includes rebound measurements and acoustic pressure limits. The old sealed or poorly vented bags were redesigned. Modern airbags have calibrated vent holes, sometimes with one-way valves that let gas out but do not let the bag collapse before you have finished your forward motion. What was lost? Nothing. Poor venting was just bad engineering. What was gained? Not getting punched twice by your own safety equipment. Crash data comparing well-vented bags to poorly vented bags showed measurably worse outcomes in the latter, particularly for head and neck injuries during rebound. Those designs were not banned by name, they just could not meet the updated performance requirements. Same result, they do not exist anymore. Passenger airbags that did not account for out-of-position occupants. This killed children and it killed adults who were leaning forward. Early passenger airbags deployed with massive force because they were designed for a full-size adult male sitting back in a normal seating position. If you were shorter, if you leaned forward to grab something, if you had your feet on the dash, if you were a child sitting too close, that bag deployed into you at point-blank range. The results were catastrophic: decapitations. Skull fractures, neck fractures. Children under 12 were dying in crashes they would have survived because the airbag itself was the lethal factor. NHTSA started issuing warnings. Parents were told to put kids in the back seat, but the bags kept killing people. The mechanism was simple. That bag needed distance to inflate before making contact. Without that distance, you were not being cushioned. You were being hit by an explosive device. Regulations changed to require advanced airbags with dual-stage deployment and occupant sensing. If the system detects someone small or someone too close, it either does not deploy or deploys with reduced force. Weight sensors in the seat, seatbelt tension monitors, even cameras in some new systems. The old single-stage bags that deployed the same way regardless of who was sitting there. Recalled, replaced, removed from production. Modern passenger airbags are not one-size-fits-all anymore. They adapt, and the death rate for children in frontal crashes dropped significantly once the adaptive systems became mandatory. The original designs were not malicious. They were just built for one scenario and deployed in dozens of others where they became the primary injury source. Those bags do not meet current safety standards. They cannot be sold. They cannot be installed. And if you have an old car with one, your risk profile in a crash is measurably worse than someone in a newer car with an adaptive system. Roof-mounted airbags that blocked exits after deployment. Rollover crashes are chaotic. The car flips, you are upside down or on your side, you need to get out before fire starts or before another vehicle hits you. Some early roof-mounted curtain airbags deployed and then stayed inflated, covering the windows completely. They blocked your exit. You could not see out. You could not break the window because the bag was in the way. You could not reach the door handle in some cases because the bag draped over it. People survived the rollover and then were trapped inside by the safety equipment. In post-crash analyses, occupants reported clawing at the airbag trying to find a way out while smoke filled the cabin. The bags were doing their job during the crash. They were preventing head injuries and ejection, but they were not designed to get out of the way afterward. Updated standards required curtain airbags to deflate or retract after the initial impact sequence. Some use tethers that pull the bag back toward the roofline. Some deflate rapidly once the rollover motion stops. The goal is protection during the event and then clear egress immediately after. The old designs that stayed inflated for minutes, redesigned, retested, replaced. Modern curtain airbags are still there when you need them, but they are not trapping you inside a burning vehicle. In fire-related fatalities after rollovers, investigators found cases where the airbag deployment directly contributed to the occupant's inability to escape. That is not a minor design flaw. That is a safety device creating a new lethal hazard. Those specific bag designs and inflation durations are not used anymore. The curtain airbags in current vehicles have time-limited inflation. They do their job and then they get out of your way. And that difference has saved lives in the critical seconds after a crash when every moment counts. Thorax airbags with metal inflator components that became shrapnel. This is the Takata scandal, but it is worth understanding the specific mechanism because it was not just bad chemistry, it was bad material choice. Takata used ammonium nitrate as a propellant, cheap, effective, unstable over time, especially in heat and humidity. The inflator canister was metal. When the degraded propellant detonated instead of burning smoothly, the pressure spike was so extreme the metal canister ruptured. Shrapnel, actual pieces of metal flying into the cabin at ballistic velocity. The airbag was supposed to cushion you. Instead, it shot fragments into your face, your neck, your chest. People bled out in minor crashes. The injuries were not from the collision, they were from the airbag. Over 30 confirmed deaths, hundreds of serious injuries. The largest automotive recall in history. Every vehicle with those inflators had to have them replaced. The mechanism of failure was predictable if anyone had done long-term environmental testing. Ammonium nitrate breaks down. The metal canisters were not designed for the pressures that resulted. New regulations mandated inflators that either use stable propellants or have rupture-proof containment. The Takata devices did neither. In statistical terms, you were more likely to be seriously injured by the airbag deployment in a minor crash with a Takata inflator than you were to be injured by the crash itself if you had no airbag. That is damning. That is the definition of a safety device that failed at the most basic level. Those inflators are illegal now, not just phased out. Illegal. If your car still has one and you have not gotten the recall notice, look up your VIN and get it replaced. The shrapnel risk is real, and it does not care how careful a driver you are. Airbags that deployed from the seatbelt itself and caused chest trauma. Some manufacturers tried integrating an airbag into the seatbelt. When you crashed, a section of the belt would inflate, spreading the load across a larger area of your chest. Great idea, poor execution. The inflation had to happen while the belt was already restraining you under load. That meant the bag was inflating against your chest while you were moving forward into it. The pressure was immense. Rib fractures were common. In some cases, the inflating bag section caused internal injuries because it was not just spreading load, it was adding force. The belt was already doing its job. The airbag was redundant and in some crash scenarios actively harmful. Crash data showed higher rates of thoracic injury in vehicles with the belt-mounted airbags compared to vehicles with standard belts and separate torso airbags. The regulations did not outright ban them, but the testing standards for chest deflection and rib load made the old designs impossible to certify. Manufacturers stopped using them. A few high-end brands still offer seatbelt airbags, but the deployment force and timing are completely different. They inflate earlier and softer. The original designs were trying to do too much in the same instant and ended up breaking ribs that would have stayed intact with a normal belt. Those systems were pulled from most model lines. The ones that remain had to be completely re-engineered to meet injury criteria. And if you are in an older car with one, you are statistically more likely to sustain chest injuries in a moderate frontal crash than someone in a similar car without that feature. The belt alone would have been better. That is the definition of a feature that should not have shipped. Dual-stage airbags that deployed both stages simultaneously due to sensor failure. Dual-stage airbags are smart. Low-speed crash first stage only, high-speed crash both stages. Unless the sensor fails and tells the system every crash is catastrophic, then you get full deployment in a parking lot fender bender. This was not a design flaw in the concept. It was a quality control issue with the sensors. Certain batches of crash sensors had a defect that caused them to send maximum severity signals regardless of actual impact force. The system thought you had hit a wall at 50 miles per hour. You had tapped a shopping cart. Full dual-stage deployment directly into your face in a situation where no airbag should have gone off at all. The injury patterns were severe. Facial fractures, eye injuries, burns, all in crashes where the occupant would have walked away without a scratch. The defective sensors were identified through warranty claims and injury reports. Mass recalls, sensor replacements, updated quality testing requirements for crash sensor manufacturing. Modern dual-stage systems have redundant sensors and validation logic. If one sensor says catastrophic and the others say minor, the system uses the lower threshold. The old single-sensor setups with no error checking, pulled, redesigned. Regulations now require sensor redundancy and diagnostic self-checks. If the system detects a sensor fault, it has to alert the driver and default to a safe mode. The original systems did not do that, they just trusted the sensor. And when the sensor was wrong, people paid with their faces. Those specific sensor modules and control algorithms do not exist in new cars. The liability was too high and the fix was straightforward. More sensors, better logic. Do not trust a single point of failure when the failure mode is an explosion 6 inches from someone's skull. Side airbags that deployed during non-crash events due to faulty wiring. This one is almost darkly funny, except people were hurt. Faulty door wiring caused side airbags to deploy while the car was just driving down the road. No crash, no impact, just a short circuit that the system interpreted as a side collision. The bag exploded into the driver or passenger without warning. At highway speed, while they were holding the steering wheel. The shock alone caused accidents. People swerved, lost control. Crashed for real because their airbag went off randomly. The mechanism was poor insulation on the wiring harness that ran through the door hinge. Opening and closing the door thousands of times wore through the insulation. Wires touched, signals sent, bag deployed. The regulations updated to require better wire routing and insulation standards for any wiring connected to airbag systems. Manufacturers had to shield and protect those circuits because a false deployment is not just an inconvenience. It is dangerous. You are not braced. You are not expecting it. That bag hits you at full force while you are doing 60 on the freeway and trying to keep the car in your lane. Recalls across multiple brands. Wiring harnesses replaced. Door hinge designs changed to reduce wire flexing. The false deployment rate dropped to near zero once the fixes were in place. But for a window of time, certain models were more likely to deploy an airbag during normal driving than during an actual crash. That is a safety system that became a hazard. Those wiring designs and routing paths are not used anymore. Every wire that can trigger a pyrotechnic device is now shielded, inspected, and tested for millions of flex cycles. And your airbag is not going to randomly explode in your face because you opened the door too many times. Every single one of these systems was designed by smart people who wanted to save lives. Every single one was tested. Every single one passed the standards that existed at the time. And every single one killed or injured people in ways that would not have happened if the system had not been there. That is not a failure of intention. It is a failure of prediction. Engineering is iterative. The first version of a safety feature is never the final version. But when the iteration happens in the real world and the cost is measured in trauma and death, the lesson gets learned in blood. The regulations we have now, the testing standards that seem excessive, the recall notices that feel like overreactions, all of that exists because someone did not make it home and the investigation afterward found a pattern. Next time you are in a crash and the airbag works exactly as intended, remember that it only works because the previous designs did not. And someone paid the price so the engineers would know what to fix. Drop a comment and tell me which of these you had no idea about. Next time I am covering the safety features manufacturers quietly removed in the last 10 years that you did not even notice were gone until I point them out. Some of them you used every single day, or thought you did.